All right, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the launch of Barbara Black's debut short story collection, Music from a Strange Planet. All right, you can see it, it's beautiful. If you'd like to buy a copy of this book, you can buy a signed copy from Monroe Books. So my name is Malaika, and I am the Marketing and Promotions Coordinator here at Caitlin Press. A little bit about Caitlin Press. So we are an independent Canadian publisher located on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. We publish culturally significant books, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Caitlin Press is also home of Dagger Editions, an imprint for the voices of queer, women-identifying writers. I would like to give a few thanks. I'd like to thank, again, Monroe's Books in Victoria, where you can purchase signed copies of the book. So if you just click the little button at the bottom that says Buy Books, you'll be able to order online. I would also like to acknowledge the support Caitlin Press receives from the Government of Canada and the British Columbia Arts Council through the Canada Book Fund as a small independent publisher. All right. So I would like to begin this event, first of all, by acknowledging that although virtual, this event takes place on the land of Indigenous peoples. Caitlin Press is located in Half Moon Bay on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Seashelt, and Sliamoon and Kalahoosie First Nations. We would also like to take a moment to encourage everyone to read the 92 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And Caitlin Press and Dagger Editions join many others in asking the government to honor all of the 92 calls to action. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going, and as I can see, as people begin to trickle into the room, the audience video and microphone are not active, so it's not like a Zoom call. We won't be able to see you or hear you. We are recording, and it will be available on YouTube after the event. Also, all of the users can see the chat. So the chat is on the right-hand side of your screen. If you would like to hide the chat and you're on a desktop computer, you can just put your arrow in the upper right corner of the chat and a little down arrow will pop up, and then you just have to click that down arrow and it will hide the chat. We encourage everybody to ask questions. You can just click the Ask a Question button and you'll be able to put in a question to Barbara. And then during the Q&A, we will read out the questions to Barbara and she'll be able to share some of her answers. If you see someone's question and you think it's great and you really want us to see it and you want it to be answered, then just click the button beside it to vote for it. And of course, we encourage you all to buy the book. It is out and available to buy. It's beautiful. I'm going to show it again here just because it's so nice to hold and look at. And we encourage everybody to support your local independent booksellers, particularly Monroe's Books in Victoria. And they have been so wonderful in partnering with us, and they're just a fantastic group of people. And we encourage everyone to give them your money, buy the book, support local, and support independent booksellers and publishers. Now that the housekeeping is done, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's wonderful host, Bill Arnott. So Bill Arnott is the award-winning author of Gone Viking, a Travel Saga, and Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries, and the #1 bestseller, Bill Arnott's Beat, Road Stories and Writer's Tips. For his travel expeditions, Bill's been granted a fellowship at London's Royal Geographical Society. When not trekking the globe with a small pack, journal, and a laughably outdated camera phone, maybe Bill can show us that camera phone at some point, Bill can be found on Canada's West Coast, making music and friends. All right, so I'm going to bring in Bill.
Malaika, thank you very much. And it is a genuine pleasure and privilege to be here celebrating our friend, author, and musician, Barbara Black, and her beautiful book, Music from a Strange Planet. My Vancouver home is on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh land. And I'll tell you why it's such a privilege and a pleasure to introduce Barbara this evening. So first off, I started going through all of her list of accomplishments, thinking, okay, I can maybe memorize these things. And it was actually too many accomplishments for me to memorize. So I've written some things I want to share with you in this manner. Barbara's list of accomplishments is exhaustive. She's an exemplary contributor in the artistic community, from composition to collaboration, which really genuinely raises the bar for peers and protégés alike. Her works appeared in such esteemed literary publications as the Hong Kong Review, Cincinnati Review, Ekphrastic Review, Prairie Fire, New Quarterly, and Geist. And I'm very excited to say that Barbara's collection of short stories, Music from a Strange Planet, which we will hear her read from this evening, has just been selected as a part of the Miramichi Readers 2021 Very Best Book Awards categorization. And you can see some of Barbara's beautiful mixed media collage work on the cover that Malaika was sharing with us earlier from this book. So let's hear from this brilliant, multi-talented artist sharing stories and readings from one of the very best books of the year, Music from a Strange Planet. And again, it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce artist, composer, and author, my friend, Barbara Black.
Wow. Thank you, Bill, for that great introduction. I'm very flattered. And thanks, Malaika, for the greeting. And just first off, I'd really like to thank Caitlin Press for helping to put this whole event together. And Vicki Johnstone, the publisher, who accepted my manuscript and really believed in it. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. And the great staff at Caitlin Press is amazing. Sarah Corsi, who's the editorial assistant, and Malaika, who you've met, and her predecessor, Monica Miller, who typeset my book. And what a book it is. I'm so proud to share this with readers. It looks great. It reads beautifully in terms of how it's laid out. And thank you so much, Caitlin Press. Thank you, Monroe's, for standing by. And most of all, thank you, everybody who is here. It's so great reading your comments over there. For me, it's over there, the chat group. And it's really nice that you're here. It makes me feel great. Thanks for supporting me. Some of you have read my book and given me comments already. So that's really cool. And I'm just very happy that you're all here. Thanks for coming.
Now, Barbara, I wanted to say to folks, and again, I want to reiterate with you, what an exciting array of comments and contributions in the chat stream. It is just it feels like a wonderfully warm space, albeit virtual. And for those that just getting a feel for the evening's of sort of itinerary, I'm going to start by asking Barbara some questions about the book, and then encourage Barbara to read a little bit from that book. I want to talk about some of that beautiful cover art, and have Malaika perhaps share some of those interesting covers that I thought were really intriguing, but that didn't make the final cut. That final selection is so gorgeous. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, drawing upon your artistic background. And then we can open it up to some questions from the attendees if they are so inspired. How does that sound?
Sounds perfect to me.
Well, all right. So as Malaika introduced, Music from a Strange Planet, it's a compilation of short stories. And I love the book, sincerely. And I've read it a couple of times now. And but I wanted to ask you about what is it that draws you to this form? Short stories, it's unique. And what brought you to this, of all things?
Well, I don't want to sound too cheeky, but I like this form because it's short. And I'm a minimalist. Whatever genre I write in, whether it's poetry or flash fiction or short fiction, whatever comes out is usually pretty short. And so I really like the concision and the compression that the short story offers. And I like to think of a novel as, like a house with lots of rooms in it, but that a short story is just a room in a house. That's how I think of a short story. Not just a room in a house, though. I recently saw a picture of these guys called the Quay brothers. They're American, and they make these little stop motion films. And sometimes they do little stage sets that are very artistic. And sometimes they do this thing called the optical box, which is a closed box with holes in it, where you can only look in through that hole into the scene, and you feel like you're inside the story. And that's, to me, has the kind of intimacy that I think a short story has. And it's a really short space to convey your character voice and your setting and your mood and your imagery. And so every detail is important. And the space limits how many details you can put in, though. But I like those demands that the short story genre makes on use of language, and it makes demands on the readers too, I think, because they maybe have to pay attention more. And I just ran across this quote that I'm going to read that has another aspect of the short story that he thinks is pretty cool. It's from Brandon Taylor, and it's in praise of slow reading. And this is what he says. A short story is an elliptical form. It tells as much by saying as by not saying. There is as much revealed in the silences, pauses, and omissions as in the thrust of the plot. So those are lots of reasons why I am drawn to this genre.
It's fantastic. Do you have a goal in mind when you set out to construct and write and you speak of the concision? Do you have a goal when it comes to creating your short stories?
Yeah, I do. What I want to do is I want to create like a mini world in a crucial moment in a character's life, and allow the reader to step into that life and experience it. Because that is the goal of fiction, isn't it? It's the beauty of written language and books, that we can sort of get glimpses of other people's lives and that we wouldn't normally encounter. So I think that's what fiction is all about. And so that would be one goal, like for the reader. And then for myself, my personal goal is when I'm writing a story, I think I want the best of my ability to discover why this character has come to me and why they've kind of like knocked on my door, and what they're questioning, what they're struggling with, what they're suffering maybe in that moment when they kind of dropped on my page. And another goal is that I like to craft my stories, like right down on the sentence level. I like to really pay attention to the tone of a sentence and the pace of a sentence, whether it's like slow, folding out very slowly or zipping by, depending on what's going on in the story, the rhythms of the word, the speed. It's almost like a musical score, sort of. So every detail feeds into the emotional content of the story. And if you read one of my stories and you say to yourself, "Oh, did she put that in there, on purpose?" And well, yeah, I probably did.
So are you almost drawing from that collage approach that we see in some of your visual art or your other mixed media in this musicality of your short story creation?
Yeah, I guess so. I do have a music background, so that really does. A lot of people say that my poetry is very musical. They go, "Oh, it's very musical," and they don't know that I have music training. And I say, "Oh, well, that's interesting that you say that, because I do have that training." So yeah.
There's no, it's not just a coincidence then that it's music from a strange planet, the title of your book, because it seems to encompass it almost like a score or a piece of music, as you said yourself. Is that fair to make that leap?
Yeah. And I think it has a number, that title has a number of things going for it. And that is, I kind of think of maybe the book itself is like music, the words coming from me, like I'm the strange planet and my music is the words of that book. And as you know, that actually is a title of a composition. It's the title of a story in the book and the title of a composition that a little genius girl writes. She writes a piece of music called Music from a Strange Planet. So that's the other layer to the title.
I like the layers, which then brings me back talking about short stories and you laying out the goals for us. I will ask you a little bit more about process later on, please.
Okay.
But then how do you know when a short story is done and what's the deal with reaching that conclusion or making that decision?
But yeah, that is tricky, you know, because I've had endings that I thought were endings in the beginning of the manuscript development, and I gave it to an editor, and the editor said, no, that's not the ending. No, I think just push a little bit more, because I do write really short. And I'm like, and I know they're always right. They're always right. My editors, aren't they? I think one of them is here tonight. And so it is tricky to know when to end it. But you know when it's authentic. You know when you've nailed it. And like, yeah, that's it. And one thing about short story endings is, as opposed to maybe a novel, which is more conclusive, is they can be strange. They can be kind of open-ended. They can be abrupt or just kind of like, you know, think you get it. And I've been reading this poet, Charles Wright. He's an American poet. And he has a poem called Last Supper. And when I read this just a few days ago, and there was a line in it I thought was perfect. It was, I seem to have come to the end of something, but don't know what. And sometimes you as a reader, when you're reading get to the end of the short story, you kind of think something profound has happened, or maybe a little shift in the character, but you don't immediately can't articulate what it was that transpired. And some readers have contacted me and said that they can only read one of my stories at a time. They need to stop, and then they need to kind of soak it in and absorb. And I was thinking about that and thinking, because the reason that happens is when you're reading a short story, your mind is kind of doing two things. It's reading the narrative part on the surface, and then you're operating at this subconscious level where you're kind of trolling all that hinted at information that the author, me, has embedded in there. And you're sort of holding that in reserve as you read. And then sometimes when you get to the ending, you haven't quite integrated those two levels. And you might take a little time to absorb it all. That's what I love about the short story endings. I love a little ambiguity. I love a little something slightly open. And some people don't care for it as much, but others, short story fans, really go for that. So that's the end of short story endings.
But as you say, with each of the stories, I found I'm hearing a little bit of an echo, so I'm not sure if you're hearing that as well.
No.
There was still a tidy, conclusive feel, even with those sort of ellipses or those, your terminology, that's a moment or a cliffhanger. It was still, each tale has a very satisfying ending in its own way.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point, in its own way. I mean, you're not going to have the same type of ending for every story. And some of them are pretty clean, of mine. So it really depends on the content of the story as well. Yeah. So I hope most of the readers who have read haven't had too many of those kind of things. They did, you know.
But
maybe.
I did.
Okay.
I found myself, just as have heard from other readers, wanting to savor each story. And as much as I've enjoyed reading the entire book, I did not want to plow through it in one sitting. I likened it to when you're doing some fine dining or it's a posh meal. there's a reason they give you a small bit of exceptional food, and maybe you cleanse your palate in between, and you enjoy. And I was feeling that literally each time I've savored your book, quite literally. But I wanted to ask you, there's such unique stuff in there. I wanted to ask you about the research process. And there's things, obviously, you got a wealth and a breadth of knowledge, but there's obviously a lot of research going into these stories. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Well, I love research. Actually, I love pretty well all stages of the writing. I love generating the story. I love the drafts. I love the researching. I love the editing and the revising. So I love research. I came from a family. A couple of my family members are here tonight. We're the kind of family that sat around the dinner table and someone said, "What is that?" or "Where is that?" And someone would get up and pull out the dictionary or remember I'm going to age myself here, a big encyclopedia, and read it. And so research is, in my blood. And when I write, I really strive for specificity I love that word too, specificity in my writing. I don't just want to say a character leaned against a tree. I want to say that they leaned against a cottonwood tree. And I want to say what the qualities of that tree are, that it had heart-shaped leaves and it was quivering. So I can feed that back into the story for echoing the character's emotions or building the setting so that it fits in with the whole emotional envelope of the story. And basically, I do a lot of research, but what you as the reader see is that typical tip of the iceberg thing, and all my research is like that big, but that doesn't matter too much. So I'm just going to mention a few stories and just tell you kind of what kind of research I did. I have 22 stories, so we'd be here, for 5 days if I tried to do them all. So I'll just start with So Sorry for Your Loss. That is the one with the woman who collects and paints moths, but she has some other kind of ulterior motives for doing that, which I won't reveal in case people haven't read that story. So for that one, I had to research the methods of euthanizing moths and properly pinning them for preservation. And so I'm going to read you just a few sentences from the opening of that story, and to show you, some of those things that I had to incorporate for my character, and a little bit of her way of viewing those things. So here we go. From the killing jar, she inspected her specimen. Acherontia styx, the death's head hawk moth. It could mimic the scent of bees and move undetected within a hive. Talents she admired. She removed the moth from the jar with tweezers and laid it out on the spreading board. With her thumb and index finger, she gently squeezed the thorax to make its wings spread, picked up the insect pin, and guided it into the body. Next, she pinned the forewings, then the hind wings. She placed the moth dorsal side up and drew her acrylics paint tray and brushes nearby. This was the moment she closed her eyes to contemplate the beauty in the death of all living things, the stillness, the form that is left behind. And so back to just a couple more stories and my research. Another story of mine, Belly Deep in White Clover, which is about a taxidermist and a porcupine. I watched so many backwoods videos for that story with these guys in their hunting gear, in the middle of some forest somewhere, and, God bless them, they were making a video of like how to skin a moose or how to track a porcupine. And at one point I was watching a video of a woman talking about how to skin a possum and how to cook it, and I don't think I still would eat possum. I looked through a lot of taxidermy sites and learning about like the tools you need and the methods and the things, the paraphernalia that you need, like the artificial tongue and artificial nose and eyes. Mm-hmm. And the kind of mounts you can do, like you can do a head mount or full body, and how you have to make that animal look natural in its pose. You have to know the animal quite well. One more story, my Japanese story, dried fish woman, herbivore man. That was fascinating because I did not know that there was a whole culture, insect culture in Japan, and especially around having stag beetles and rhinoceros beetles as pets. And people collect them. There's insect lovers clubs. Families go to the mountains for excursions to hunt beetles. And there's even special outfits for kids, like a collecting suit, they call it. And they have the little nets and their little containers. So there's insect comics. There's stores for these beetles, all the stuff you ever want, your little beetle pet. And there's insect poetry, which my male character in the story said he really hates the bug poetry. I researched Tokyo bars and restaurants. I'd never been to Tokyo, so I kind of had to virtually go to Tokyo and sort of research what my two characters might eat or drink. And I still haven't tried a sake martini. I got to do that one day. And then finally, my Scottish story, The Mist-Covered Mountains. Thanks to Dugald McEwen for appearing in my life, because now I know like everything about the Scottish Highlands. And the great thing, Bill, about when you're researching things, all these little serendipitous moments come up where there's these little tidbits of things that fit perfectly into your story. Like peat bog ecology and wind turbines they're putting up on the heath and midges, lots of midges.
Would you care to read a little bit from Mist-Covered Mountains? Because that is a lovely one. And
it is. Okay, yes, I will do that. And I'll give you a little background for it quickly. I just written about 15 really serious short stories, and I said to myself out loud, I want to write like a happy short story, if there is such thing. And well, there is, because I actually wrote one. So here's the scene. A Canadian girl from Toronto is with her mother, Robin, and they are driving around in Aberdeenshire, in Scotland, trying to find this stone house that Pippa, the girl, believes she lived in a previous life. Meanwhile, Dugald, this retired plumber, is in his house, and he is cooking bannock on his ancient peat stove because his retirement goal was to cook every recipe in his antique cookbook, The Scotsman's Scullery, which I actually made up, but practically real. So here we are. It's Saturday, July 30th. They've already covered most of Aberdeenshire and had 3 false alarms. Her mother is beginning to think this whole thing is a bad idea. Maybe Pippa read somewhere about the Highlands and merged this with the scant information Robin had on her Scottish birth mother. Pippa rolls down the car window, thrusts out her nose like a dog. Stop! Stop! She sits upright in her seat, eyes wide and crazy. We're here. I smell it. Smell what? The baking, the oven things, the bun smell. It's coming from that house with a long driveway. Part of her memories includes olfactory hallucinations of pipe smoke, dog fur, and fresh-baked bread. Her mother eases into the winding drive and parks. Pippa rushes up Dugald's front path and knocks forcibly on the door. In the kitchen, Dugald is trying not to burn the bannock on the round griddle, swearing blue murder at the smoky peat fire. He quickly moves the griddle to the hearth to answer the door. Hi, I know you. No, you don't. Dugald has white flour on one cheek. Yes, I do. No, you don't, lass. You're the one who crashed your Mini Cooper into the pub. Dugald slumps against the doorframe as if he's been shot by a firing squad. No, I'm not. That was my father, Robert McEwen. Can I come in, she says, elbowing Dugald aside, walking into his living room and straight up to his dog, which she bends down to sniff. This is not the dog I smelled. Mine smelled like warm milk and leather. Might be you were smelling an old milk cow. They used to keep them right in the house. You smell like a goat, she says to Dugald, and sits herself down in her chair. Robin Brodie, the girl's mother, rushes over the threshold and extends her hand. The man has a bit of a palm. This is Pippa. Sorry, she just barged in. Robin explains the recovered memories. The name Brodie sticks in Dougal's head. Pippa springs up to reach for an old clay object on the bookshelf. What's this? Granny McEwen's pipe. Ladies don't smoke pipes. They did in the old days. She was a canny solid gran, worked every day of her life. This looks like my mum. What are those things on their backs? That's my da and his sister with baskets of peat, something you dug out of the moors. What's moors? Robin pulls her daughter back into the chair. They stay for bannock and jam. Dugald patiently explains to the girl how the peat stove works. As Pippa and her mother leave by the front door, Pippa shouts back, and we'll come back on Sunday too. Dugald nods and runs the Scotsman's Scullery Index through his head. There we go.
That is lovely. Thank you, Barbara. That's and well done with the accents. And you know what I'm saying in the chat stream. They're very much appreciated.
Oh, thank you. I was very sorry it was going to revert into an Irish accent, which I do all the time. So yeah,
it was
Google
great.
Thoughts somewhere in the fictional universe for me.
Now, I wanted to speak a little bit about, or if you're ready to talk about, I think of the visual art, such a big part of your process, and talking about a book project, this really is your project, having not like creating that cover as well. You don't see a lot of authors necessarily having that degree of involvement. And can we talk a little bit about not only that gorgeous cover that you decided on, but some of these earlier iterations that were options that you chose not to go with? This is an earlier cover, isn't it? And tell us about this telescope woman, please.
Well, first I'm just going to say thanks to my publisher, Vicki Johnstone, who said at one point to me, she found out I did the Instagram collages and said, hey, would you like to collage your own cover? And I was, oh yeah, okay. And so I had a crack at it. I did 7, and I picked 3 of the what I thought were the best ones to give to Vicki, and these will be those 3. So this one was adapted from a previous Instagram collage, and it was a poem called Venus. In the original, the kind of steampunk woman was in front of some clockwork machinery, and her telescope pointed at the moon. So I recollaged it and changed it. She now stands kind of in front of this strange orange planet, which looks kind of like could be Mars. I think it was actually a blow up of an eyeball. That's collage for you, right? So now her telescope looks up to the title of the story. And just a little trivia bit here, the background. What do you think that is, Bill? What does it look like to you?
Well, my first thought is either, a horizon, like fire potentially, or fabric, perhaps like
okay, you guessed correct.
Okay.
Well, what it is, it's a portion of a photograph of an antique hand-woven carpet made in Afghanistan a few centuries ago. Was just one of those happenstance things. It just tied together the colors of the collage so well. I used it.
It really
that
works.
that was a runners-up. That one wasn't chosen. And so let's look at the next one that I submitted to Vicki. This one is based on the story Strangely Luminescent in the Dusk, and that is a story in the collection. And it's about two young people who undergo transgenetic protocol to receive genetic material from moths. It's kind of a futuristic story. And the woman on the left is Adela, and she is named after the moth, Adela septentrionella, which really is a real moth. And if you look at below her bodice, at the whole kind of skirt part of her dress, those are the actual wings, a photograph of the Adela septentrionella moth. Got any questions for anything in there, Bill? What else should I talk about?
It's a unique amalgam of stuff. And as you say, with collage, you never know where it ends up with some of your component parts. And that is a fabulous part of the process. Alchemy in its way, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. It's serendipity a lot of the time. I don't even know how I'm going to do it when I start. And then sometimes something comes into my mind, or I look in my materials, like my old magazines, and I see something, and then it just builds from there.
It's the top right, those feet flying out, that you said is?
Oh, that's the other character. They're kind of like a boyfriend and girlfriend, and that is Atticus, and he is named after the moth Atticus atlas, which is actually quite a huge moth. This was originally a little bit scoped out more, this collage, but we decided to bring it in and crop it much tighter. So we lost his wings, but his feet are flying out of that alley. So yes. That's Atticus, what you see of his feet anyway.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, carry on.
I probably should, maybe I shouldn't explain. Well, the character Adela, she's holding this kind of disc-like thing. That is a cocoon, and it's actually based on a dream I had years ago, where I was walking through this old sort of cobblestone street, which I actually kind of painted a little street and village like that for the background with kind of watercolor. And I was with a man, and this man wanted to take me into a building, up into an attic, and to look at this cocoon that was about this big, and we kind of observed it. And the two characters in the story do that in the story. I won't say much more, don't want to spoil it. But there you have it. That's what she's holding. And this was one of the runners up. We thought maybe the watercolor makes it too subtle. I don't know. I still love that image anyway. So.
But I do love what you chose, the final one. If we, Malika will share that now. Yes. And this, not only you feel free to just tell us about this. It's a caribou woman. Am I right?
It is. This one's based on another story that's in the collection. It's based on the story The Watcher and the Watched. And that one is about a female, kind of a little bit conceited woman, an installation artist. And at one point in the story, without spoiling it, she dresses as a female caribou. And so, with this one, this was the last cover I actually collaged. And so I thought, I want something more dynamic this time and something vibrant. And I happen to love turquoise. So I bought it was actually about this big piece of artboard that was turquoise, cut it down, and I collaged on top of that. So we got a really nice popping color. And then I wanted motion as well. So I have her hair kind of streaming off like that. That's like the hair of about 5 different people, I think. That is an actual caribou antlers and muzzle and ears, a northern Canadian caribou. And I decided to give her different eyes. And this is what really cinched it for me and for Vicky, how once you look at that cover, she engages you. And there's sort of this moment where you're connected. So yeah, I was really happy with the dynamic quality of that one.
It works. I do have a question, if you don't mind. On that the right edge, there's a watch or a clock. Is it a pocket watch? It looks like a pocket watch to me. just hiding on that.
Yeah. Yes.
And what's that about?
Well, it's not actually part of the story, but what happened was I had done the collage, and it was late at night, and I wasn't finished, so I couldn't photograph it yet for Vicky. So when I do my collages, I don't glue them down. And I call them ephemeral. I dismantle them when they're finished, but sometimes I have to weigh them down or the paper curls up. A little bit of curl up is good, because if you look at the door and her arm and the the right-hand edge of her coat, there is a shadow, and that sometimes can be from the paper sort of sticking up a bit. But what I do is I have this box. My dad was a watchmaker, and I have this box full of all his like watchmaking paraphernalia. He had drawers and drawers of this stuff. So it's like clock bits and, springs and everything you can imagine, and pocket watches that don't work. So I put these brass plates on top of the collage, and I put the pocket watch on her sleeve. Came back in the morning, took off the plates, and I only slid the watch over, and then I went, actually, that looks kind of cool. And I also, there was a little bit of a, sort of white space, turquoise white space there, and I left it in because I thought it has a kind of mystery to it that I liked. So that's why it's there. My dad's pocket watch is on my book cover. That's kind of cool.
That's very special.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Go on.
I just wanted to say I like also that her exiting the door kind of relates to the story, and that I like that it kind of has the theme of transformation in it, which does run through the book too. So I was really happy with that image.
As you should be.
Yeah,
it's a definite winner, and it's no coincidence that you were selected for one of 2021's very best book awards by Miramichi Reader. That is an exceptional club to be part of. And I wanted to ask you, as I know many of us are curious, a little bit about your writing process. And I would just say to Malaika, if there have been questions coming in from attendees, she should just jump right in. But until that time, why don't you tell us, Barbara, a little bit about your process?
Okay. I don't really have a process in a way. Like my process is to not plan, which is kind of echoes my approach to life. In a way.
I may have been leading you a bit there, because we had a fun visit one time about you used a sort of a quirky little a prompter tool that may have stimulated some of your stories or initiated was part of your CanLit involvement.
Yeah, that's true. That's one of the exceptions to the rule, and I'm gonna get to that. I promise. I'll just describe my quirky process, and then I'll talk about that. So my approach is really organic, and it's in the moment, and I trust my instincts, and I know my process by now, and I really trust it. I know it's going to unfold in the right way for me, and so I just kind of, when I'm just generating a story, I'm usually still reading on the side or writing on the side, like writing poetry or flash fiction. And so I just keep my kind of one ear open to the cosmic plasma, I call it, out there. And I'm kind of in this state of readiness subconsciously anyway. And then what happens is usually either a character's voice or a character drops down on the page, or a really definitive kind of line that has a really good style to it, or sound, or just something. If I know it's authentic, that's when I pursue the trajectory of the story. And I have a favorite short story writer. He's American. A lot of you might know of him, George Saunders. And he has a new book out that's great, all about short story. And he says this method, excuse me, he calls it follow the voice. And it sure works really well for him. His stories have a lot of twists and turns, and it works really well for me too. So once I've got that sort of, this is where my story's going to start, I generate a first draft. And of course, it's always really short because I'm a minimalist. So a lot of people, some people, writers, they write reams, and they always have to come in, and I'm the opposite. I always get this kind of hard kernel, and then I have to kind of tease out the edges. And as I do that and the situation develops and deepens, then I can perfect my sentences and add details. And I'll do about 10 or 20 versions until it feels it's finished, and then I will edit it myself. And then when the whole manuscript is done, I get a professional editor. I had 4 different ones, and I learned something from each one of them about craft. It was great. So I have worked on that manuscript for 4 years. So now I'm going to get back to that thing at the beginning you talked about, the exception to the rule of never planning. So a lot of you might know Geist magazine. It's kind of a quirky literary magazine. It's really fun. And they had this thing up it's still up there actually, called the CanLit, as in Canadian literature, CanLit premise generator. And what this thing is it's like a quirky random machine, and you press the button and it generates a string of story memes based on sort of like Canadian culture, or the kind of cliches of Canadian culture, I guess. And so like you might get something, like a hockey team is lost in the Laurentian woods and they bump into a polar bear who's eating poutine, and I don't know, and then Leonard Cohen shows up. So it's pretty crazy. So I tried it. I pressed the button and I got an unusually tall man with an antiquated profession falls in love with a wild animal. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to make him a taxidermist, and I am going to make the animal a porcupine. And I thought it would be a funny story. And I kept trying to write this funny story over, and then it just didn't work. So I put the story away, and I kind of, let it orbit around my head for quite a few months. And then finally it came down, and it was the same premises, but it was a really sweet story. It was a very serious story. It was a very quiet story and tender, and people have really liked it. And that is the story Belly Deep in White Clover. There you have it.
That was an excellent choice of making a bit of a leap for you into your non-traditional motivators, because the result was awesome. So kudos.
Yeah.
Now, Malaika gave us a feel for, at the beginning of our evening event, how to get our hands on copies of your book. I've enjoyed mine, as I say now, couple of times. It's got an honored place on the bookshelf. I'm admiring your bookshelf behind you. And I know you were in Monroe's Books recently signing copies. Yes. And that's where we can.
Yes, I was.
And Malaika, what else have you got to share with us where folks could get, if they aren't able to pop in necessarily in person to Monroe's Books in Victoria?
Sure. So the great news is that people can actually order online from Monroe's Books as well. And if you just click the little buy button at the bottom of the screen, it will take you to Monroe's book and you'll be able to buy it online. But I wanted to ask a few questions, because on behalf of the audience, because we've had quite a few coming in. And then you mentioned Belly Deep in White. And I'm so curious about that short story. And I'm thinking maybe if we had time, maybe you could do a little reading for us at the end as well, if that sounds good. Perfect.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So we have so many questions. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. The first one that has a number of upvotes comes to us from Carolyn. So thank you, Carolyn. Carolyn is asking, Barbara, when did you discover that you had such an affinity for insects?
That's a good question, Carolyn. Thank you. Well, as a child, I was a very dreamy child, and my family members over there will attest to that. And I was always fascinated with insects. And I didn't collect them, and I didn't pin them and put them in jars. I sort of played with them, but I never hurt them. But really, mostly, I just observed them. And again, here I was a miniaturist. I was already a miniaturist. I liked the little world that the insects lived in. And I lived in a place where Carolyn also grew up, North Vancouver, backing on a park. So there was lots of natural, lots of plants and animals and insects. I'm still like that. I'm still a miniaturist. And I have a garden in the back that's a bit of a jungle at the moment, but I love planting for pollinators, which can be numerous types of bees. I better not go on too much or I'll bore everybody. But anyway, leafcutter bees and carder bees and mason bees. And I love to observe them still as an adult in my garden. And can you repeat the question again for me, Malika?
Sure. When did you discover that you had such an affinity for insects? And then there's a little bee emoji.
My nickname is Bee too, actually, because my initials are BB, and I love bees. So there you have it. And the insects made their way into my manuscript. Some stories in a big way, some not so much. And then at some point, I was going to call the manuscript "The Lives of Insects," and then I thought, no, maybe that's too buggy, and people, some people don't like bugs. So I did a few stories with a very small reference, and there's a few that have none as well. So thanks for that question, Carolyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then, okay, we have another one with a vote here. This one is from Sean. So Sean asks, your musicality shows in the rhythm and pace of your writing. I have read your book, loved it, and I have two favorite stories, Walk on Water and The Watcher and the Watched. Do you have a favorite, quote unquote, child?
As in favorite story of, okay. It's hard. I love all my characters, even the ones that start out, even the Watcher and the Watched woman, I love her because she changes. But if I had to pick one, I would say the darkling beetle, because the little girl in that is kind of like me. I didn't have glasses, but I like how she sticks to her guns and she is just being who she is. And she doesn't want to dress up like everyone else does at Halloween. She has a particular interest, and that's what she pushes for. And it's her mother who, and not modeled on my mother at all, by the way, her mother who doesn't really see who her daughter is. So I think that's a sweet story, and I had an awful lot of fun putting the whole thing about the furries in there as well, with the mom and dad experimenting themselves with dressing up as something other than being human. So that was a great question. Thank you for that question, Sean.
And a great answer. And now we have something from, let's see here, Todd. So Todd is asking, do you have any favorite authors and or books? And yeah, any that you want to share and talk about why you love them so much.
Oh boy. Okay, now I got to remember book titles. As far as short stories go, I read a whole lot of collections while I was writing the manuscript, and there's just two classic writers that I go back to all the time. And one is the short story master, Anton Chekhov, because he has a certain kind of spareness and dryness, but he puts so much in his stories that you don't even know was there. And he has those elusive endings I was talking about with Bill, the huh, or the, oh, didn't expect that. He can be tricky that way. So I still love Anton Chekhov. I also, this is going to surprise you, I really like the short stories of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I know most people would think of him, they think book this thick, 100 Years of Solitude. But he writes great short stories. They're sometimes a little bit surreal, but they're really vivid. And I studied his stories a lot when I was kind of writing the manuscript, and I analyzed them to see how did he get there? How did he do that? So those are two classics that I always come back to. A while ago, I discovered a short story writer called Kevin Barry before he was well known. He's Irish, and he is a beautiful writer without being a flowery writer. And he's so sympathetic with his characters. Most of his books are set in Ireland, so I think he's fabulous. He just wrote a novel a little while ago. He has a new one, I don't know what it is, about the Beatles, around the Beatles coming and traveling to Ireland. That's kind of cool. I like Sarah Hall. She's British. Madame Zero is brilliant. And, there's a Canadian writer that I don't know if that many people know, Douglas Glover, who is quite a brilliant short story writer. He's funny and he has a very unique voice, which I like in a writer. Other Canadians, Kathy Page, she's also British, I think. She has a couple of short story collections. One that comes to mind is, now I can't forget the title. It's all about twins and doubles. And Maria Much, When We Were Birds, that is fantastic. That's kind of based around fairy tales, very dark and dense and lyrical at the same time. I love Graham Robb. He's a nonfiction writer. He's written about France and French writers, Paris. He's very good. He's a nonfiction writer that sounds like a fiction writer. He can make things so vivid. I think he's really good. So that's about what I can think off the top of my head there.
Thank you. I mean, I hope that the person who asked the question, Todd, I hope that you were taking notes. I mean, I want to go through all of those recommendations now and add to my bookshelf. Switching gears now from words to art, we have room for one last question, and Louise has asked if any of your mixed media artworks are available for purchase.
Oh, well, they're not, but I've been asked that question before. Someone on Instagram that I didn't know asked the same question. I did print one for the Gage Gallery on Opie Avenue, which is where I live, because they had a pandemic theme where anyone in the area who they didn't have to belong to the collective gallery could submit an artwork. And so I submitted my the first of the 3 covers, The Telescope Woman. I submitted that one and they accepted it. But not yet, because I dismantle them. I do keep the parts now in a whole separate envelope. But because in the beginning they were ephemeral, I called them, that I can only reproduce them from photographs. So that might be a thing. Maybe I can make t-shirts like my writer t-shirt with collages on them. I do have bookmarks too, and they are slices of my collages. And I've considered, I don't know, I always just want to give things away, but I could sell those as well. Maybe I could put that on my writer page or something if people want to buy those. Usually I tuck them into the books. I don't have any at the moment. I have to reprint them for, people who have bought my book. So that's a good question, Louise. I don't feel like I'm a real artist yet. I just started the collage thing a few years ago to teach myself how to collage. I have a friend who was going to be here tonight. He probably is, who is a coach. And he said, you need to be on Instagram. And I said, why? He goes, well, because you're a writer and, you should be on social media. And I go, well, I don't have a dog and I don't have a cat or cute kids. So what am I going to do? He goes, well, just post anything. And I did do that at first. And then I thought, it's not, I thought writing's not a visual medium. So what am I going to do? So I came up with the idea of the collages and taking excerpts from my writing and just started, just figuring out how to do it. It's been a really fun thing. And it's such a break from the writing. I see Kathleen. Maybe they could be. I think she's No, I don't know what she's talking about there. So anyway, that's my take on art. Thank you, Louise, for that question. I'm going to have to go away and think about whether I might want to go in that direction.
So stay tuned, and I'll share Barbara's social media handles and her website with everybody in an email after the event so that you can easily follow her and stay up to date with everything that she does in the future. We have a little bit of time left. Barbara, did you want to read Belly Deep in White Clover for us?
I could do it with, okay, sure. I will do that. I'll give you a little setup for the scene. Johns is the taxidermist, and he's had a female porcupine visiting his back door for 4 days. And contrary to his beliefs about wild animals, he's kind of befriended this porcupine. Not quite befriended, but become fond of her. And so in this scene, they venture beyond his property. She was there again. He went out in his blue work coveralls. With an outstretched hand, he approached her with another cob. She regarded him with her shiny brown-black eyes and moved forward to accept it, her paws soft and textured. As she gnawed the kernels with her square red teeth, she made a squeaky childlike sound. The noise surprised him. It was somewhat endearing. When finished, she placed the cob on the ground, waddled away a few feet, and turned as if beckoning him to follow her, which he did, his hunched figure a larger version of her own. Past the old well she led him with her loping walk, past the rusty tractor skeleton and the disintegrated smokehouse, into taller grass that led to the spruce grove up the hill. She seemed to know exactly where she was going. A stand of red alders along Tacklook Creek, and more specifically, one festooned with catkins that looked as if it could hardly support her weight. Johns stood watching her shinny up. It was just past dusk, and the scented air floated down, resinous from the lodgepole pines. The drought had weakened them, brought the bark beetles that would eat them from the inside out. Johns was conversant with the valley's flora and fauna, but he sensed there was an entire language to it that was beyond him. He pulled out his tobacco pouch and filled a cigarette paper, rolled it, ran it across his tongue, then underneath his nose, put it in his pocket. He went home, puzzled as to why the porcupine had led him to her perch. He didn't mind the walk, though. It had been a long time since he'd wandered beyond his own 9 acres. Supper was steak and canned peas. He sat outside in his beaverskin chair while the stars made bright pinpricks in the darkness. A northern saw-whet owl called, escalating staccato pitches that sounded like notes from a small wooden flute. He spent the remaining night hours working on a timber wolf restoration, replacing the incorrect eyes and softening the decades-old face by moistening the lips and applying putty so the mouth could be more relaxed and natural. The old boy looked more himself by the hour. A sliver of morning sun showed behind Milligat Peak, as pink as new skin. It was something neither Johns nor the porcupine saw often, being the nocturnal types. When the first rays of light made the lamp redundant, Johns headed for bed. Up with the sunset, down with the dawn. Past the mounted heads of moose and bighorn sheep, his prized saw-whet owl, and the red-throated loon, he reinserted himself into the imprint of his body on the sheets.
Barbara, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
I like that story as well. And thank you, Malika, for fielding all those wonderful questions as well. And Barbara, for those brilliant answers. This has been a lovely event. And congratulations on this exceptional book, Barbara.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being my generous and happy host. I always like being around you and hearing you speak. And thanks for taking the time to lead us through this event. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Malika. Also, nice to have you here. And it's fantastic to have had all of you people over there whose faces look like little pixelated, I don't know what's, bots. It's super nice to see you on the side there. And I enjoyed your questions and your comments. I kind of glanced over there once in a while, and apparently I will get to a copy of your comments afterwards from Malika. So I'm going to have a good time, drinking my bubbly now and reading your comment. Thanks so much for your support, everybody. It really buoyed me up. Yeah, this was a fun event. Thank you so much for coming, and have a really good evening or night if you're further east. And enjoy my book if you are going to read it. And have a great summer, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for hosting, and thank you, Barbara, because if it weren't for you, none of us would be here. And for those of you who are wondering when the ebook is going to come out, if there's going to be an ebook, yes, there will be an ebook. So stay tuned, and we will share details about that on social media. And in the meantime, I also want to give another shout out to Monroe's Books for partnering with us. And you can buy the book by just clicking on the Buy Now button, and also be on the lookout for a newsletter that I will send shortly after this event with all of the relevant links and information. So thanks everyone for attending. This was fantastic, and have yourselves a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. See you.